those millennials. You know what?
They're here.
You are stuck in a time warp, okay?
Yeah.
They're here and they're...
Welcome to episode 16 of Rockstar CMO FM. The M is for marketing and the F is for, well, you decide. As you may be asking yourself, does the world need another effing marketing podcast? I'm your host, Ian Truscott, founding editor of RockstarCMO.com, which we built for a community of like-minded, straight-talking marketers to share their experience and opinions to help the next generation of Rockstar CMOs. If you're new to the show and what we do, come check us out. RockstarCMO.com. This episode was recorded on Friday the 26th of June. Here at the Rockstar CMO penthouse in London, we are in the lockdown twilight zone. We still have to queue to buy tea at the supermarket, but next week, the barometer I've been using of lockdown on this show, the pubs will reopen. And wherever you are, I hope you are safe and well, and thank you for sharing some time with us. For regular listeners, I'm sticking to the script. I have a wonderful interview coming up with L.Michelle Smith, who has a fantastic marketing career, a champion of diversity and inclusion, and now shares her experience and energy through her speaking, mentoring, consulting, and coaching programs, as well as her own podcast I've mentioned on the show before, Culture Soup. While it was a fun chat, it's probably the most serious and important conversation we've had on the show, and I hope you enjoy it. I'm again joined by my friend and content marketing mentor, Robert Rose, Chief Troublemaker from the Content Advisory, for a cocktail in the virtual Rockstar CMO bar, and he shares one thought for this week. But first, I'll suggest one article from our wonderful community that I think you should take another look at. Let's get started, shall we? Okay then, the article I'd like you to take a look at is from last year. It's a Tales from the Tour Bus interview with Sydney Craig Hart back in our People Are People issue that was themed around diversity in marketing. I mention it now as I refer to it and this whole issue in my chat with L.Michelle Smith coming up. It's quite a read. It's from a genuine interview transcribed by me following a Zoom meeting with Sydney prior to having this podcast. From pages and pages of notes rather than over email as many of these things happen. And of course, we published this issue way before the current wave of social unrest in the US right now. Sydney is the CEO of Smart Simple Marketing and was a fabulous interview guest. She helps small businesses grow and has been asked by some of the big guys like Facebook and Google to help them bring an inclusive approach to their product development. One of the highlights for me from that conversation was that aside from being inclusive, being the right thing to do as a society, the marketing opportunity in diversity marketing is huge. As Sydney shares, Black people in America spend $1.4 trillion on products and services each year. The Latino community spends $1.7 trillion. Globally, women's income around the world is $18 trillion. Women are involved in 75 to 80% of all household buying decisions. Now, I'm not meaning to trivialize the need for social change as a commercial opportunity, but it's a statistic that reflects the changing consumer demographic, something you'll hear more about in the next segment as we do the interview. Speaking of which, let's move on with the show. I will, of course, include a link to this interview with Sydney in the show notes at rockstarcmo.com/podcast. And if you follow us on Twitter, you'll see we've recently reposted that article. L.Michelle Smith is an author, speaker, and certified executive and business coach who develops leaders and brands that thrive and succeed at the intersection of culture, technology, and business. She is the founder of No Silos Communications and provides content, coaching, consulting, and strategic communications. She has more than 25 years of experience as an award-winning communicator, an integrated marketer at global agencies, her own boutique agency, and a Fortune 10 technology, telecom, and media company that you'll hear us talk about. It was great to catch up with her again, and I hope you enjoy the conversation. You can, of course, find all the resources and links from that conversation in the show notes at rockstarcmo.com/podcast. Welcome to Rockstar CMO FM, Michelle.
Hey, Ian, thanks so much for having me on. I'm so excited. Congratulations on the show.
Thank you very much. I know that you're way ahead of me with the podcasting game, so that means something. Thank you very much. How are you?
All good. I am great considering I feel like we're in the apocalypse.
Yeah, we'll get onto that in a minute.
What else can 2020 bring?
I don't know. We've had at least 3 of the horsemen of the apocalypse so far. So why don't we start? You've worked with us in Rockstar CMO. You've shared your story with us in the publication. What? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, currently, I am the CEO of No Silos Communications LLC. I am a speaker. I am an executive and business coach, certified, I should say. And I am also an author. I'm working on some books right now. And one of my first published publications, if you will, was when I was 22 years old, 23 years old, something like that. Coming out of grad school, my master's thesis was actually published. So not
Wow.
my first time to the rodeo, but it is my first time to the rodeo actually going through agents and big publishing houses.
Yeah, I'm always amazed how much you've got going on. Whenever we chat, you've always got loads happening. So 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 hopefully we'll get on to a little bit of that.
I was going to say, I think it matches my energy level, but it's
Hmm.
also something that I make sure that the businesses that are clients of mine understand that while you don't want to work yourself thin, I mean, self-care is a big deal, but it's
Hmm.
best to diversify your lines of business if you're an entrepreneur. So when COVID-19 happened, guess what happened to the speaking business?
Hmm. Yeah,
Right. Who was flying? Who was going to events? Sure,
yeah.
people are doing it online, but because people are doing it online, they aren't getting all the sponsorships they're looking for. So
Hmm.
most of these events are free. So they aren't offering as much, or they aren't offering any fees at all.
Yeah.
So you have to have other lines of business to lean into so that you don't suffer.
Yeah, and I've heard that actually from a lot of my friends that are on the circuit is, what do you do next? And also a lot of consultants, they get the opportunities, don't they, from speaking, and so their consulting business has been affected too. So it's good that
Right.
you've been able to diversify, and I think that's been the advice to everybody, hasn't it?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah, yeah. So how did you get into marketing in the first place? I mean, I think I met you when you were just at AT&T or at the end, and what?
Yes. So I had been at AT&T probably about 5 years when I met you. You
Hmm.
probably connected with me on LinkedIn a little earlier than that.
Hmm.
But going all the way back to the 1990s,
Hmm.
I had my first real integrated marketing, PR, strategic communications job with Fleischman Hillard.
Hmm.
And this was pretty early on, and my first few accounts were pretty big. Back then, it was SBC, Southwestern Bell. I'm
Hmm.
dating
Wow.
myself now. And I was on the team that helped launch DSL, broadband.
Wow.
So I worked there. I worked with one of their sister agencies where I made VP before I was 30, which kind of blew my mind. A year later, 9/11 happens.
Yeah.
And so everybody was reevaluating life. But you know what?
Mm.
I take that time period and compare it to what's happening now. Now, death
Mm.
wise, we're having a 9/11 every day in the
Mm.
United States when it
It's
came to
true.
death. It's
Hmm.
crazy. But that was an acute crisis that happened right away.
Hmm.
Boom, 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 it was over, right? And then we dealt with the fallout. This
Hmm.
is a smoldering crisis. And
Yeah.
so we don't really see the end of it. And I say crisis, it's crises. There's
Yeah,
more
we'll
than
get onto
one.
that in a moment. Yeah, yeah,
There's more
absolutely.
than one. But I feel like I'm very blessed and fortunate to have cut my teeth during that time because it wasn't too long after that I started my first entrepreneurial pursuit, and I ran an agency for about a decade
Hmm.
before taking a couple of accounts into a larger agency
Hmm.
after I started a family. So,
Hmm. Yeah, no, and I learned a little bit more about your story because when we were preparing for this, we were talking about, well, what should we discuss? I've got a whole bunch of questions here that we were going to go through, and I've basically thrown them away because I just read a recent post you did for Brand Innovators, 13 Steps of Brand Inclusion. And in that article, you don't just share 13 steps, you share your story. So we've heard a little bit about it there. And I think one of the interesting things there, well, there's a lot going. I mean, firstly, how are you with what's going on in the US, and how are your clients, and how are the people you talk to on your podcast?
you know what? I had a group coaching just last week with some of my cohort members
Hmm.
and some of my one-on-one clients that, they can opt in to the group sessions if they want to.
Hmm.
And they are primarily women, and they are also primarily women of color,
Hmm.
of different backgrounds. I have Asian, African American, and some others. And it was interesting to just ask them in this safe space how they were feeling.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
Mm-hmm.
I emphasize safe space because so often and plenty of times during this new awakening, I will call it, the civil rights
Mm-hmm.
movement that has been called the largest in the world's history,
Mm-hmm.
which
Mm-hmm.
is something to stop for a moment of
Mm-hmm.
silence for, because my parents lived through the 60s
Mm-hmm.
and the 50s and the 60s. So they saw the original civil rights movement in the United
Mm-hmm.
States, and to think that their original social network was the church. That's how they got their information to
Mm-hmm.
find out where Dr. King was going to be, or the other leaders that were doing what they were doing back then. But there was no internet. All that to be said, these women needed to emote,
Mm-hmm.
because even though they're surrounded by people, nice people, more than we've ever seen before, standing beside us,
Mm-hmm.
you have a bag full of emotions and it's hard to describe.
Mm-hmm.
So first of all, you're saying, okay, why now? This has been happening over and over and over again. We've been
Mm-hmm.
shouting it. Of course, in the workplace, we can't say a word. Or if
Mm-hmm.
they ask us to, they put us in front of people and ask us to talk about it.
Mm-hmm.
Totally different ball of wax. And many times you don't feel like talking about it. And then
Mm-hmm.
others were saying, I had to explain it to a friend of mine that I've known forever. And she got on the phone and she sounded clueless. And it was one of the
Wow.
quietest people in the group. Before it was over, she was slamming her fist on the table and knocking down items. And all the ladies on the call were just cracking up and going, you know what? Get it out. Because
Mm-hmm.
we have this, stereotype that if we emote a little bit, you're an angry Black woman,
Mm-hmm.
or
You're
even
scary.
if you're white and female, and if you emote, you're crazy.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody can relate to that. But now more than ever, I was having a conversation with a friend just this morning. We don't care anymore what someone else thinks.
Mm-hmm.
And then the idea of policing our emotions on something that is very, very valid
Mm-hmm.
is in itself a microaggression. And a friend of
Yeah.
mine named Lovey Ajayi calls it the caucasity. Said, tell us how we should feel when we've
Mm-hmm.
been burdened. I'm literally 3 generations from slavery. And when you think about that,
Yeah.
it's not very long ago. My great great grandmother was born on a plantation.
Mm-hmm. And it's
Sorry.
really brought.
Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say it's brought all of that home, hasn't it? This awareness, and
Absolutely.
hopefully for more than just the people affected in the community. And that I'm hearing an awakening amongst everybody around this, and I've done some research myself. And I think I'm seeing that. And that's what I liked about your article for Brand Innovators, because not only did you tell your story, and I'd like to come back to your view about accepting roles that are for diversity, which I think points to a little bit of what you just said about expressing what it's like, and you have to stand in front of people to tell them. But from the 13 steps, what advice are you giving to, should we call them the executives that aren't necessarily personally affected by this? Well, and people looking to understand the issue more. Where would you point them to?
Absolutely. So there was a reason why I did my storytelling, and anyone that's heard me speak knows that I start with a story. Even the podcast, the Culture Soup podcast, starts out with a story, and it usually starts with something like the year was, right?
Yeah.
And the story really wraps itself around the value of real, authentic relationships, one-to-one relationships that I had with the people who eventually pulled me in at AT&T. These were people that I knew from past lives, and even when I worked at Fleischman Hillard, they were part of that team. So I had this trust, authentic trust with these individuals, and they are just good people. And that's how they knew me, as a good person. Of course, excellent in our crafts, but good people. And that trust is the thing that's going to move the needle. And that
Mm-hmm.
starts with hearts and minds. So, yeah, I unravel 13 things, but the foundation really is getting to know somebody for who they are and
Mm-hmm.
what they offer, so that when they ask you things that you've said no to over and over and over again, you actually consider it. And that happens in the story.
Yeah, for sure. And because I think when we met, you had the diversity role, I think, at AT&T. And as we discussed before the call, my two girls are both mixed race, and I've been married to my wife for 25 years, and I've always been concerned a little bit by people that take on diversity roles, because I then think that people look at them as only being qualified because they're not good at their craft. They're just
Right.
they are a representative, if you like.
Yeah.
And that seemed to come through in your article. How did you feel about that?
I'll give you a little color to, in context to, it's in the article, but this bit probably isn't. When I first got started, there were people around me that had decided that since I was Black, I was going to be really good at African American diversity.
Right.
And, I'm not a member of LGBTQIA community. So what are you going to do about that? Oh, by the way, you don't speak Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
So how's it going to work?
Mm-hmm.
And I had all the segments, but at the same time, this was my first diversity gig. And the reason why I took the gig and I knew that I could do the gig was because classic marketing does segmentation, even if it isn't race.
Yeah.
So if you study up on what you need to know and really have a heart to be culturally aware, you can guide teams that have the cultural awareness. I had an Asian agency. I had an African American agency. I had two agencies that did Hispanic comms. I had an agency that helped me with LGBTQIA. But I had the vision, and I also was able to say, go get me some data and let's get some real insights. That's how you do marketing. That's how you do PR.
Yeah.
And you are Caucasian.
Yeah.
I had people on my team that were white as rice, and they were on board and they knew what to do, but they also knew how to lean in to someone who knew more. And that's one of the points in there. Humble yourself.
Yeah, and I wasn't going to spend the whole episode talking about this particular article, but there is so much in it. Because one of the things I also liked your quote was the 2000 census, I think you referred to, and the ethnic group the biggest rising ethnic group was other, right? Which was completely not recognized. And that was cause for conversation last night around my dinner table when I talked about this article at home. So how do we respond to that? What was your view from seeing that piece of data? Because you just mentioned data, and data is what changes people's behavior.
Yes, data is actually what changed my mind about even taking the role. Yeah. But in the time that I was running my agency, I represented a beauty brand, of several beauty brands, and this one particular holding company had a whole portfolio. And this was back in 2006, something like that, where they were literally looking at the change in curl patterns in people's hair, right, and also hair color, to denote what was happening in the United States. So what they were seeing was more curly hair, more tightly curled hair, coiled hair, and they were also seeing less and less blondes. The hairdressers were saying they were seeing less and less true blondes sitting in their chairs. From the time they started in the business to that time. So the insight right there just really rocked my world. I never would forget it. I never would forget it. That we were actually looking at people's hair and understanding that America was browning.
Yes. Now, that was the phrase you used. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. What that didn't consider was the influx of immigrants that were still coming. They never stopped. But you have more people coming over from other countries that are brown. And that is really what manifested so much of what we're seeing when you see the stat that at some point they said by 2024, the minority will be the majority. And that was a Nielsen stat. And that needle just keeps moving.
Yeah.
If you look at the Gen Zers, my daughter's a Gen Zer. She was born in 2012, and this is in some of my keynotes too. Some people that have heard me will know that I'll talk about my daughter Joni, born in 2012. 1 in every 2 babies born in the United States was a baby of color.
Wow.
So that's before you even get to accessibility market, women, LGBTQIA. You've got those overlays. So, and ultimately we're very intersectional, but what that tells us is add that on to the millennials, who are the most multicultural adult generation in the United States of America. And by the way, they're knocking on the door of the C-suite right now. They've got homes, they've got families. So people that are saying, those young people, those millennials, you know what?
They're here.
You are stuck in a time warp, okay? They're here and they're grown and they're running things, okay? But that means that the word minority, at least in the United States, and definitely in the world, it's a misnomer. I don't even use it anymore. So it was that insight alone.
What I liked about what you were just saying was the positivity for a marketer, in that there's that huge addressable market, and that we need to start thinking about, you know, who our audience are from that perspective. And when we did the diversity issue a few issues ago, and you contributed to that for us, thank you very much. That really came through from our contributors, which was like, no, this is a thing you do because it's just good business, right? It's just, you know, and the way you design your products, the way you design your marketing, having that sensitivity is just good business. It isn't something weird we should be doing. Does that make sense?
It makes a lot of sense, but I got to tell you, if you're going to sell it into the C-suite, especially if the C-suite isn't knowledgeable of what you and I now know, you have to have hard data. You have to have hard data. You can't just say it's the right thing to do. Right. Because you're talking about spending resources. So the one thing that I learned in those 6 years that I had that role, if ever I needed money to pull something off, if I went into the executive suite with hard data charts and graphs and showing how they will make money or avoid losing money. And if I could do that in one slide, I get cash.
And I think that's good advice for any marketer, right? Whatever they want to do. You have to have the data behind you, and you have to do that research for sure, and that's great. But I would encourage people to. I'll include a link in the show notes to that issue, because there was also data in that issue. Sydney, one of the other people who contributed to that article, she shared some great stuff about the growth of the Black consumer. The fact that there's so many Black women entrepreneurs, I'm not just saying that because you're on the show, but
the U.S. Census data came out in 2017 the first time and said this group was over-indexing more than any other group in starting business, but there's a reason why, and it gets back to what's in this article.
Because
that U.S. Census also showed that we have more advanced degrees than any other group. So we're over-credentialed, and most of us start in a workplace, mainly a corporate workplace. We hit a Black ceiling. That's what we call it. The Asians call it a bamboo ceiling. You talk about we all are all familiar with whatever color it is, right? Or whatever it's made of. You get stuck. And you feel unappreciated because you've over-educated yourself. You're killing it just to be considered equal. And these women are bailing and starting businesses. So that stat alone shows us that something inside of the corporate institution has to change. And while we're looking at George Floyd and the young man, the 27-year-old man in Atlanta that was killed and murdered, running away from the cops, I mean, we're seeing this over and over and over again. This is an indication of what institutionalized racism, and that's one of the notes there. Don't be afraid to say it. Come from behind your diversity inclusion talking points and call it what it is. That's the best way to be anti-racist, is to point it out. But that racism is all through the fiber of any colonialized country, let alone the United States. But
Right.
we have this history of slave ships coming over.
Yeah. Well, if I can, that's a sobering moment, absolutely. But so when you were working with AT&T, aside from bringing the executives the data, how did you move the needle in that organization? I mean, surely you must have come up against some executives which were pretty, the tough situations. So, especially back in the day. So, how did you work your way through that?
In the beginning, it wasn't so difficult. Again, those people that pulled me in, it was my upline. So we already had a degree of trust and already had an idea of what I could bring to the table. Sponsorship is so important in that situation. And the SVP at the time, who's now the Chief Communications Officer, was one of these folks. Now, I didn't win him right away. You had to go in and show him data, hard facts, right? But each time we would take that budget and turn it into magic, sheer magic. You have to just wow them and show them results. It was easier going back into the C-suite. And I also had other clients across the business because at this company, they understood that it couldn't just be a marketing thing. It couldn't just be an HR thing. It had to be supplier diversity. It had to be public affairs. You had to be in the community. You had to be doing your CSR around these topics. You had to have stakeholders across that business at the highest levels. So all of those people were my clients too. And I built relationships with them and ultimately helped them to look good to their peers. And it created a nice community of buy-in that made it much easier each time to go to the table because I built the credibility.
Yeah. And you said the phrase there, look good. And there was a spate of brands publishing their social posts with a black background and offering their support. And I actually posted on LinkedIn that they do know that we can just click on who works there and we can see their diversity for ourselves, right? So what was your view when you saw your social feed covered in these black posts from these brands?
It was interesting because the early contenders that came out, Johnny on the spot.
Right.
First of all, give them credit for even wanting to speak. I'm glad. It was like, whoa, really?
Yeah.
But then we started to see a series of them. There was a meme going around on Twitter that actually showed like a cut and paste version. Like everybody's Ben and Jerry's, right? Ben and Jerry's was just like, you know what? Stop racism, stop white supremacy. I mean, they were there, and we have a new flavor with blueberries, somebody said.
Right.
So, you can chuckle, but, they had that history already. It was part of their brand. And you had many companies that were kind of new to the party that wanted to say something, but didn't realize that they weren't just speaking to police brutality. If you say Black Lives Matter, that means Black livelihoods matter. Yeah. And that means within your organization, what are we going to see?
Yeah.
That's why there was no action in the first few, too.
Yeah. And that's what I posted as well, that the only change, all brands, all organizations can change the world by how they hire people and who they hire, right? So, and to give people livelihoods and that kind of stuff. So, yeah.
And here's the thing, it's not an easy fix. And I think this is why so many people really recoil or they're hesitant to make commitments because this is multi-year and you're going to end up having to dismantle things where people were comfortable. And then you're doing more than just throwing money out into the community. Here's about 10 million that should satisfy things. No.
Right.
It's very uncomfortable to look at a leadership pipeline that isn't working for certain people, that when you get to the middle, there's a gushing hole. And you take Black women, for instance, We have no CEOs in the Fortune 500 since Ursula Burns retired from Xerox in
Wow.
2016. She was the only one, and
Right.
we're still waiting.
Right.
Fortune
Right.
500, not 10. We're talking about 500 different companies.
Wow.
500. And then
Wow.
even in the companies that do well in diversity and inclusion, you see a precious handful of my overeducated sisters.
Mm-hmm.
And this is
Yeah.
so many of us going, let me go do this myself.
Mm-hmm. On this very podcast, I think it was the last episode or the time before that, one of the things I recommended for people is they should listen to Culture Soup. And the reason why that is because of the people you highlight. Tell us a little bit about your podcast.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you, because we rank consistently in the UK, and I know a lot of that has to do with you. So thank you so much. But the Culture Soup podcast is a weekly podcast with one extra episode that happens every second Tuesday called the Coaching Corner, and it zeroes in on the pain points of corporate professionals and small businesses. And you may have seen it live on LinkedIn. We've now moved to Facebook Live, Twitter, Periscope, and YouTube, so you can catch us anywhere every second Tuesday. But I interview people on the Thursday show.
Yeah.
And this is the cornerstone flagship episode.
Right.
And storytelling. And if you ever have the opportunity to binge listen, you will hear from the very beginning, the preamble, where I kind of set the table around my value proposition and the why.
Yeah.
And the reason was because when you stand on stage multiple times, like for 2 or 3 years straight, over and over and over again, speaking about diversity and inclusion for one of the biggest brands in advertising with a curly strawberry blonde afro.
Yeah, I haven't tried that.
Some people think this is what you do and this is all you've done all your life.
Yeah.
And while it's not a bad thing, there were 20 years that preceded that. So this is my opportunity to take my value proposition of thriving at the intersection of tech, culture, and business and bring it to life with that one thing that undergirds my brand, and that is, who doesn't she know? And
that's true.
I've connected to a lot of amazing people, but the gist is that you have to be my friend because the chemistry has to be there.
Yeah.
I don't give, you're very kind to give me prompts for questions, and I don't do that. It's unscripted.
Okay.
I get up there and I roll. There is a formula, but you are so good at what you do. It makes the listener say, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm right there in the living room with them, yucking it up. But man, what I just learned, and who was that person? I should know them. Or, my God, it's Rev Run. So you've got this dichotomy of people that you're like, I don't know this person, but I should know them. And then you've got other people that come on, they're like, I know exactly who that is. And they're talking about what? And that's the thing. We usually don't talk about the thing that you know them for.
Right. And you have a diverse range of interviews that you've done.
Absolutely. It wasn't called the Culture Soup, which is pulled from one of my keynote messages where I say social media is culture soup. It's based in research, all of this good stuff. That underrepresented groups drive a lot of the conversations, the trends, the hashtags, all of that. It'd be called This Is Your Life. It's not overt. Although I start out with how I met this person and how they're a part of my life, we start to unravel very important issues and trends in tech, business, and culture. But eventually you get to know more about me. Yeah.
I love the Culture Soup name, and it really does describe what you're doing. So I think that's I absolutely recommend people listen to it, especially if they want to get to know the story of Black entrepreneurs. You have a lot of Black entrepreneurs on there, and I think they eloquently tell their story well, and I think it's an important piece of education. I want to just go, one of the things we haven't talked about, and maybe lighten the mood a little bit, if you don't mind, is one of the things that we've never discussed. It just came through in your Q&A when we first got together, is you're a classically trained mezzo-soprano. Have I got that right?
For you non-classical music types out there, that's a mid-range soprano. Now,
Mhm.
if you talk to my music minister at my current church, you talk to anyone that's led any kind of group that I've been in, singing group, band, or whatever, they would say, if we need somebody to hit that note to be a first soprano, we'll call Michelle. Now, I do have a range, but
Wow.
I'm comfortable in the mezzo range. So if you were going to name somebody who was a mezzo soprano who was not in, classical or opera or something like that, Whitney
Yeah.
Houston, God rest her
Oh
soul,
my
is a
gosh.
mezzo soprano.
Wow.
Okay. All right. You get an idea. Vanessa Williams, more like an alto. Okay. But I've never sung opera, although I sit on the board of Opera America.
Yeah, I
And
was going to mention that. Yeah.
this
Hmm.
conversation about inclusion is the very thing that got me there.
Hmm.
Speaking at their conference in 2016, I
Yeah.
talked about how to usher in inclusion to the opera.
Hmm.
One way doing that was to leverage social media, because social media is culture soup. You can
Yeah.
reach more people, all
Yeah.
of that, and you can take opera to the people. So
Yeah.
the CEO there, Mark Skorka, literally chased me for about 4 months, and I feel real bad about it, but I really was on the road, and I
Hmm.
did not realize what he was going to ask me. And once
Nice.
I finally said, this guy is really trying to reach me, let me at least do a
Hmm.
phone call with him. He's like, I'd like to ask you to be a part of the board.
Wow.
And I'm so proud of that organization, because that is one of the most exclusive
Hmm.
genres and industries out there. And it was built that way, with notes in the air. This is what we're doing. We're keeping people out. And
Yeah.
now you have more people inside, whether
Yeah.
they be Jewish or whether they be LGBTQIA, or maybe they're just white-haired white people that are
Yeah.
sick and tired and want to see a change and understand that the audience is dying out.
Yeah. 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 It's
So
back to
I
our
think
point earlier that yeah, it's just the right thing. I mean, it's the right business decision to make, isn't it? To broaden your base.
right.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I tell him in the Q&A after that message that I'd only been to one opera, and the reason wasn't because I didn't enjoy it. I grew up with Leontine Price. I grew up with Kathleen Battle. These were our heroes, right?
Yeah.
But the one time I went into an opera house, I felt very uncomfortable. The
Hmm.
experience was not inclusive at all. And the
Hmm.
people looked at you like, what are you doing here? And the only
Hmm.
people that looked like me were the people who were wiping down things in the restrooms.
Hmm. Hmm. Wow.
Why would I go?
Indeed,
Mhm.
indeed. It's been. I do have one more light question for you.
Sure.
We
You tried. You tried
we
the last time, right?
yeah. Well, it's such an important issue, though, Michelle. And it's so nice of you to tell us the truth, really, about your
Sure.
experience and stuff. Um, what I was going to ask you about, and I always end the interviews with what you'd like to throw in the Rockstar CMO swimming pool. The bullshit of our industry, but
Yes.
what we've just talked about. I mean, let's just throw all of that in there. But
Okay.
but something lighter. You were talking about, and I can't believe I'm bringing this conversation back to marketing after where we've just been. But you were going to throw omnichannel marketing into our Rockstar CMO swimming pool
Yes.
because you described it as creepy surround sound, which I thought was really cool. Yeah.
If it's done right, it's supposed to be one of those things that you barely notice. And
Mm.
if you notice it, you're surprised and delighted.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Many
And
times it doesn't happen like that.
no. So you're equally as tired as remarketing and all that kind of rubbish that you see all over the place.
When it's poorly executed,
Yeah.
that's for sure.
All
Yeah.
right. Well, I've done my bit to ask a marketing question.
Okay. Good. And all of this is related because you can't do great marketing
Yeah.
unless you're inclusive.
Yeah.
You can't.
Absolutely.
Forget it.
Absolutely. Well, I've enjoyed this conversation. Every conversation with you is a delight, Michelle. And at this particular point in time, to hear your point of view, I think hopefully will help the people that listen to the show. So if people want to learn more about you, where will they find you?
Sure. L.MichelleSmith.com is my little space in the interwebs. And you can find it on just about the most popular social networks. So on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, where I will bust a move from time to time. I am L.Michelle Speaks.
I,
L.Michelle Speaks.
I should tell my girls, because I did mention TikTok to my youngest daughter, who's 16, and before I finished the sentence, she looked at me and she said, "Daddy, no." So I don't think.
If you're serious about it, you find your lane, right?
Yeah.
You're not trying to be the Gen Zer. You're not trying to be the 12-year-old that's doing the renegade every day. But as a professional, I have found that there are other professionals on there, and my messages around leadership resonate. And right now, during this time, because TikTok, the community on TikTok has really stepped up when it comes to the civil rights movement. I can really layer in a lot of my cultural messages. In fact, there's a really strong, pretty poignant TikTok that's still making the rounds. I wouldn't call it viral, but people are like, well, oh my gosh, and it's still moving. I tell the history of the mammy image. And the reason was because of the recent decision by Quaker Oats and PepsiCo to dismiss Aunt Jemima. And what people don't understand is that image, it's powerfully destructive. Yeah. And with or without that pancake box or that syrup, she's still here. And she does image. And she has an evil twin. Her name is Sapphire. So if you're interested in any of that, go to L.MichelleSmith.com, because I really break it down.
And you also mentioned that we're back to that article again, because you did mention that as well. That one article has pretty much sustained our whole conversation. I think it's brilliant. Yeah. So that was wonderful. Thank you very much for your time, Michelle. And I really look forward to speaking to you again.
Ian, thanks for having me on, and congratulations again on the show. I'm excited.
Thank you, Michelle, for that interview. Hope you enjoyed the conversation. Food for thought, I think you'll agree. I will, of course, include all the links and resources that we discussed, plus links to Michelle's website, social channels in the show notes at rockstarcmo.com/podcast. And maybe it's time I ignored the cultural advisor that is my youngest daughter and had a look at TikTok. Right, it's Friday, and we've all had a long week, and I could definitely use a cocktail. And who better than the man behind the Friday concoction hashtag himself to guide us through our rapidly depleting liquor cabinets, as I join Mr. Robert Rose in the virtual Rockstar CMO bar. Good evening, Robert. What are you drinking?
Oh, hello, my friend. So good to see you. Well, here is the thing. We have a wonderful drink this week. And it's something that I wanted to resurrect because a lot of us are feeling a little, locked down, as it were, still because of this horrible pandemic that's going around. Yeah. Interestingly, I started this little concoction a couple of years ago, and I called it the Shutdown Special, and ran across it again, and I was like, wait a minute, that was from... and then I went, oh, right, that was because of the U.S. government shutting down. Yeah. And I actually had made this drink after the shutdown of the U.S. government came back, but it's just a perfect one to revisit now. It's a wonderful reposado, so it means you need a lighter tequila for this. So a reposado tequila, some cayenne pepper to add some spice to it, a little bit of lemon, and then coconut nectar, which you can find at any good grocery store.
Yeah. No, that sounds fantastic. Let me have a look, see what I've got here. What I have here is some Bombay Sapphire gin. Is that similar to that tequila? I think.
I think it's light. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think that's what it's very. Yeah, it's very light. Hang on, let's stick a bit of that in there. So that's not a bit more than that, I think. That's like a good old measure.
Be generous with that.
Yeah, I think so. It's Friday, might as well. And then the other ingredients were a
little cayenne pepper and a little coconut nectar and lemon.
That sounds just like tonic water. Fantastic.
Yes,
I have some tonic water, so let's put that in there as well. Oh, you know what? I forgot the ice. You said something about ice, I believe, didn't you?
Certainly, this is a rock drink. Absolutely, yeah.
Cool. All right, let me give that a try. Oh, that's very nice. Very nice indeed. I do like that. And what did you say it was called?
That is called the Shutdown Special, right?
Wow.
But it was originated not for the shutdown of COVID, but rather the shutdown of the U.S. government back in 2019. So, but it's just as appropriate today as it was then.
Yeah, I think so. And I think people, if they drank one of these, they would applaud the shutdown of the government.
That's exactly right. Well, it's not only meant to celebrate the shutdown, it's meant to shut you down too.
Well, let's see how I get on as I sip this as we continue with this conversation. Well, so talking of conversation, and we're having this government shutdown drink, and you're not going to suggest we go and sit on the lawn in Washington DC and drink this, are you? Where are we?
I am not. No. Yeah, there are a few places I dislike more than Washington DC.
We're doing the full tour.
That's right. The place for this drink is because as you sort of get out of the ingredients there, it's got a little bit of spice to it.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think the place for this is there is a place just north of Cabo San Lucas, Mexico. And it's a resort that's just sort of out in the middle of nowhere. It's called the one and only Palmilla. And it is just the most fabulous place because it is on the Gulf of California, which is on basically the east side of the peninsula of the California peninsula there of Mexico. It's on that coast, right? So not on the Pacific Ocean, but the water is. It's one of the only swimming beaches on the Gulf of California there, and it's just a fantastic place to enjoy a nice spicy drink.
Wow, I've never been to Mexico, so it sounds idyllic, and it might actually encourage me to buy some tequila. Yeah, maybe join you. Yeah, that sounds fantastic. And so, I guess we're watching. I have this view that we can see the sea, the sun's coming down, and we've perhaps had some tortillas or something, and some nice tequila. What is it that we'll be chatting as we watch that scene? Chatting about?
I think it's funny right now. I think there are a lot of people thinking about reflecting on what it is going on, the way that our business should be positioned, the way that our marketing should be constructed. And one of the things that I find that is missing in critical reflection, and this actually comes out of, there was a guy by the name of Gary Rolfe, who is an Englishman, actually, who back in the 70s, was a nurse practitioner, and he talked about building a framework for critical reflection. And he said one of the things that I find fascinating is he talked about, two of the three steps we often do really well when we reflect. We sort of look on what happened and we think, oh, that's, we understand what happened. And then we ask, why did it happen? And we can get into reflecting about why it happened. And then the third step is to say, now what? Or, what happens now?
Yeah.
And this is the part he talks about, and I think is really common, where we make a misstep. Because when we say what now, we typically try and predict the future. Instead of asking ourselves how we're going to change. The classic example that he uses, which I think is a wonderful one, which is you decide to take a different route home from work. And so you make that decision, you take the different route to work, and what happens? It's horrible. There's traffic everywhere, big traffic jam. It's congested. You get home, and what's the first thing you do is you say, well, I'm never doing that again.
Yeah.
Instead of saying, and what happens is you lose the opportunity of critical reflection because you try to predict the future. You're saying, oh, it's always going to be that way. So I'm never doing that again. Instead of asking, well, why did I want to take a different route home from work in the first place? What was my rationale for that? And that's the idea of critically reflecting. And I think it's an important one for us right now.
Yeah, no, that's really good. I like that. Is it something you've written about before that I can drop a link in the show notes to?
I have indeed written about this.
I thought so.
I have indeed. I've been talking a little bit about this of late.
No. So I'll include a link to that, and I think it's interesting, and I'll just plug your blog a little bit here, because you talk about a wide range of things, and some of them are life lessons as much as marketing lessons. I think that's really, really interesting.
Yeah, it's one of those. I'm finding it to be helpful. In terms of all of the, so much of what I'm talking about these days are just sort of documenting my own exploration of change and asking myself how I feel about all of this. And so, to whatever extent it can be helpful for others, it's great.
Yeah. Well, don't they say that you should write about what you know?
or write about what you don't know in your exploration of finding it.
Yeah, that's a good point as well. So just as a reminder for everybody, and I hope that we have regular listeners because they should enjoy your thoughts. Whereabouts can people find you when they spin the dial on the old interwebs?
Oh, well, aren't you lovely? I'm most often found at my little company, which is called TCA, or the Content Advisory, which you can find at the wonderful Dad Jeans domain of contentadvisory.net. Somebody once told me that the .net is the Dad Jeans of domains, and I'm leaning into that. I think that's wonderful.
Yeah.
And then, of course, I'm on all the social networks, LinkedIn, Twitter. If you do a search, you'll find me.
Yeah, and is that blog post on your blog on contentadvisory.net?
It is indeed.
Good. I'll include a link to that. Thank you very much, Robert.
Absolutely a pleasure.
And I'll see you next week.
Yes, you will.
Thank you, Robert. A pleasure as ever. And that brings us to the conclusion of episode 16, recorded Friday, 26th of June. Thank you to L.Michelle Smith for a fantastic interview. Thanks, of course, to Robert and to the wonderful Rockstar CMO community that keeps this thing alive. And, of course, thank you for dropping a virtual quarter into your podcasting jukebox and choosing to jive along to our tune. Next week, I will be chatting to FinTech CMO Sally Yates from Accepta, someone I'm looking forward to learning more about, as we've not featured her before on Rockstar CMO. Hope you join us for that. In the meantime, stay safe, stay well, and as sane as you feel you need to be. And I look forward to you joining us again on Rockstar CMO FM.
You may know you're listening to this show along the Marketing Podcast Network, but did you know there are other great shows on MPN to help your business? Christy Heiler hosts a fantastic podcast called Own It. Christy, tell us more about the show.
Own It is all about celebrating women and non-binary advertising agency owners. We talk about buying out of the Boys Club of Advertising because less than 1% of ad agencies are owned by women.
And where can people subscribe?
You can find the podcast at untilyouownit.com. We're also on the Marketing Podcast Network at marketingpodcast.net. And of course, you can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.
You heard her. Go subscribe. This podcast is heard along the Marketing Podcast Network. For more great marketing podcasts, visit marketingpodcasts.net.